The next day, the council convened again, and this time, the decision was clear. Ezekiel had been caught in a lie. Evidence had surfaced that proved he had been at the shrine that night. The mask was found in his possession, hidden away in a secret chamber beneath his hut. I was vindicated, but it didn't feel like victory, because the price of truth was steep. Ezekiel was exiled from the village, his name erased from every memory. He was nothing more than a shadow now, a man with no past, no future. And though I had exposed his betrayal, the victory tasted bitter. The cost of uncovering the truth was too high. It had torn apart everything I knew, my friendship, my family, my place in the world. And as I watched Ezekiel disappear into the wilderness, I realized something. The truth had set me free, but it had also left me alone. The path to truth is often treacherous, and though the storm had passed, the scars it left behind still haunted the village. Exposing Ezekiel's betrayal should have brought me peace. But in truth, it only left me with a hollow ache that lingered deep within. Ezekiel was gone. The village had erased him from their memory as if he had never existed. No one spoke his name anymore. The rumors surrounding the theft of the sacred mask dwindled, but they never fully disappeared. My reputation had been restored, but it was a fragile thing, one that could shatter with the next gust of wind. I spent the days in solitude, walking the familiar paths of the village that no longer felt like home. The rhythm of my life had changed. The simple joys of carving, of working with wood, had lost their warmth. What had once been a source of comfort now felt like an empty routine. The council meeting had been brief. After Ezekiel's exile, the elders offered their apologies, but the words seemed hollow to me. Chief Okari had expressed his relief that the village could finally move on from the chaos, but there was no mention of the betrayal itself. There were no words of condolence for the hurt I had endured, for the bond one had lost. I sat in my hut late that night, my hands working absent-mindedly over a carving that wasn't coming together. The rhythmic scraping of the chisel on the wood was a faint distraction from the turmoil in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about Ezekiel, the boy who had been my brother, the boy I had trusted above all others. It was a pain I had never known before, the kind that gnaws at your insides, relentless and unforgiving. But what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal, it was the feeling of being left behind. The village had moved on, and I was no longer a part of it. I had been thrust into the role of the hero, the one who had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, I had lost everything. My place in the community was forever changed. I was no longer one of them. One evening, as the village settled into its usual rhythm, I heard a soft knock on my door. It was Mama Nwakigo again. Her presence was a constant in my life, a steady force that grounded me when everything else felt like it was slipping through my fingers. She entered without waiting for me to answer, as was her custom, and sat down beside me. "Obinna," she said gently, "you've been quiet these days." I didn't look up from my carving. "What's there to say?" I muttered. "I've done what needed to be done. I exposed the truth. But now, it's like nothing matters. The village doesn't care. They've moved on." Her hand rested on my shoulder, her grip warm and comforting. "The village has its way, Obinna. You must not take it personally. The truth is a burden. It weighs heavily on those who seek it. But it does not always bring the peace they expect." I stopped carving and looked at her. "Then what am I supposed to do, Mama? I've lost everything. I've lost my best friend, the only person who understood me. I don't belong here anymore. The village has turned its back on me." Mama Nwakigo sighed softly. "The village is not your enemy, Obinna. The enemy is within you. You must learn to forgive yourself first, before you can seek forgiveness from others. Your heart is heavy with the weight of betrayal, but it is you who must find a way to heal it." "I don't know how to heal," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can." "You will," she said firmly. "But first, you must understand that the road to healing is not a straight one. It will be long and difficult. And sometimes, the hardest battles we face are the ones we fight within ourselves." Days turned into weeks, and though the wounds of betrayal still lingered, I began to work again. The village carried on around me, and in some ways, I found solace in the routine. But there was an unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest, a feeling that something was not right. Something was still unfinished. It was on one of these quiet afternoons that a stranger appeared. He was a tall man, dark-skinned with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through me. He wore a cloak of dark fabric, and despite the heat of the afternoon, he seemed unaffected by the sun. His presence was commanding, yet there was an air of mystery about him that made me wary. He walked into the village like he belonged there, as if he had been sent for a purpose. No one seemed to know him, but the villagers quickly began to whisper among themselves. I could feel their curiosity buzzing in the air. The man approached me while I was carving in the village square. He stopped a few paces away, his gaze steady and intense. There was something about him that made me uneasy, but at the same time, I felt compelled to listen to what he had to say. "I know who you are," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "You're Obinna, the one who exposed the thief. The one who lost his friend," he said, as if he were reciting a fact rather than asking a question. "You're also the one who is carrying a heavy burden, aren't you?" I stood up, my hands clenching around my carving tools. There was something about this man that I didn't trust. "Who are you?" "I am someone who understands loss," he replied cryptically. "And I have a message for you. A warning, if you will." The tension in the air thickened. "A warning?" I repeated, my heart racing. "Ezekiel's exile was not the end of your story, Obinna," he said, his eyes narrowing. "The truth is still out there. And the truth, much like the mask, cannot be hidden forever." The stranger's words hung in the air long after he left. There was something unsettling about his message. Something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. Ezekiel's exile had been swift, the punishment severe, but the stranger's words made me question whether it had truly been the end. Had I truly uncovered everything? Or had there been more to the story that I had missed? In the days that followed, I became increasingly consumed by these thoughts. What if there was more to Ezekiel's betrayal? What if there was a deeper conspiracy at play, something that even I couldn't see? Could the mask have been a symbol of something greater? Something that the gods themselves had not fully revealed? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The strange coincidences. The things I had brushed aside in my rush to prove Ezekiel's guilt. Was there a greater force at work, manipulating events behind the scenes? The village was still reeling from the aftermath of the mask's theft, and though they had forgiven me, I knew I couldn't rest. There was more to uncover, and I had to find it no matter the cost. The stranger's warning echoed in my mind long after he had disappeared into the shadows of the village. The words themselves were simple enough, but there was a weight to them that felt impossible to ignore. "The truth is still out there," he had said. "The mask cannot be hidden forever." It was clear to me now, my battle with Ezekiel, the theft of the mask, and his subsequent exile were not the end of the story. No, the mask was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that I had only begun to understand. For generations, the sacred mask had been the cornerstone of our village's rituals. It was said to embody the spirits of our ancestors, a vessel through which they could communicate with the living. The mask was not just a physical object, it was a symbol of our connection to the divine. It was revered and protected above all else. I had never questioned the importance of the mask. As a child, I had been told the stories of its power, how it had been passed down from the gods themselves, how it had protected our village from natural disasters, and how it had guided our people through times of war and famine. It was the beating heart of our traditions, and nothing could touch it without consequence. But the stranger's words had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Could there have been more to the mask than I had been taught? Was its power truly as benevolent as we believed? The shrine where the mask had been kept was an ancient structure, tucked away in the dense forest on the outskirts of the village. Few had ever set foot inside it, as it was considered a sacred space, reserved only for the elders and the village priestess during times of important rituals. After the mask's theft, the shrine had been left in disarray. The priests had been too busy with the investigation to properly restore it, and the sense of sacredness had dissipated in the wake of the scandal. I could no longer ignore the pull. Something deep within me urged me to return to the shrine. The feeling was almost like a compulsion, a desire to see with my own eyes what had been left behind, to understand the true nature of the mask. What had Ezekiel been after? Why had he gone to such lengths to steal it? That evening, under the cover of darkness, I made my way to the shrine. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the path. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures stilled, as if the land itself was holding its breath. As I approached the shrine, I felt the weight of its history press down on me. It was as if the very air around me thickened, charged with a power that I could not explain. The door to the shrine was ajar, the hinges creaking softly in the wind. I stepped inside cautiously, my heart racing in my chest. The air inside was cool, the smell of old incense lingering in the space. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, symbols I didn't fully understand, but that held an undeniable significance. At the center of the room stood the altar, where the mask had once been displayed. Now, only an empty pedestal remained. A revelation. I approached the altar, my hands trembling as I ran my fingers over the smooth stone. I had never truly understood the significance of the mask, what it represented, what it had the power to do. But now, standing in the hollow silence of the shrine, I felt its absence like a physical ache. It was as though something important had been stolen from me, from all of us, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, some sign, perhaps, something that would make sense of everything that had happened. But as my eyes swept over the shrine, they landed on something I hadn't noticed before, a small, weathered scroll tucked away in the corner of the altar. I reached for it cautiously, unrolling it with careful hands. The writing was in an ancient script, one that only the most learned elders could read. But beneath the symbols, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. A drawing of the mask, yes, but it was not the mask I knew. It was different, darker, more elaborate. The scroll detailed something far more disturbing than I had ever imagined. The mask was not just a symbol of our village's connection to the divine. It was a key that unlocked a power far older and far more dangerous than anything our ancestors had ever intended. The mask's true power. The scroll described a legend that had been buried in the folds of time, a legend that spoke of the mask's creation. It had not been crafted by the gods, as I had been told, but by a group of ancient, forgotten priests who had once ruled over the land. These priests had sought to harness the power of the gods themselves, bending the divine to their will. The mask, it seemed, had been the tool they used to tap into that power. But the legend also spoke of a curse, one that had been placed upon the mask to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. If the mask were ever removed from its resting place, the curse would be triggered, unleashing a darkness that could not be contained. Ezekiel had known this. He had known the true power of the mask, and he had been desperate to claim it for himself. I had been too blinded by my loyalty to see it, too trusting of a man who had never been the friend I thought he was. But why had the elders kept this knowledge from us? Why had they allowed us to believe that the mask was nothing more than a symbol of the gods' favor? Were they hiding something? Were they complicit in the secrets that the mask held? The next day, I sought out the elders, hoping to find answers to the questions that had been swirling in my mind. I couldn't confront them all at once. There were too many of them, and I was just one man. But I knew who to speak to first, Chief Okari. The chief had always been a wise man, one who held the knowledge of the village's history in his mind. If anyone had the answers, it was him. I found him alone in his hut, sitting by the fire. His face was lined with age, but his eyes still held the sharpness of someone who had seen many things in his time. When I entered, he looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Obinna," he said quietly, "I know why you've come." I didn't speak right away. I had been preparing for this moment, but now that I was here, I found myself unsure of how to begin. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me for days. "The mask," I said, my voice low. "What is its true power? What did you and the other elders know?" The chief's eyes softened, but there was a sadness there too, an understanding that I'd crossed a line that I might never be able to return from. The mask is not just a symbol, Obinna, he said slowly. It is a key to a power that was never meant to be controlled. The priests who created it sought to control the gods themselves, but in doing so, they doomed us all. He paused, as if weighing whether or not to say more. You are right to question us, Obinna. We have kept the truth hidden for generations, and it has cost us dearly. I felt a surge of frustration. Then why keep the secret? Why not tell us the truth? Chief Okari sighed. Because the truth is dangerous. There are forces at play in this world that we cannot begin to understand. The mask is one of them. And sometimes, the best way to protect people is to keep them ignorant. I left the chief's hut with more questions than answers. The truth was beginning to unravel before me, but it was more complicated than I had anticipated. The mask was not a simple relic. It was a key to something ancient and powerful, something that could change the course of history. But with that knowledge came a terrible realization. The mask had never truly been ours to control. It was a force that could consume us all if we were not careful. As the sun set on the village, I stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the shadows. Ezekiel's exile had not been the end of the story. It had only been the beginning. And now, I faced a choice, one that would determine the future of our village and possibly the world itself. I had learned the truth, but was I willing to pay the price for it? The decision to face the truth had come with a weight that pressed down on me every waking moment. The mask was not just a relic, it was the key to something far greater, far darker, than I could have ever imagined. The elders, the village, even Ezekiel himself, they had all been caught in the web of this ancient power. But now, it was up to me to untangle it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more lurking in the shadows, something I hadn't yet understood. The days following my conversation with Chief Okari were filled with uncertainty. The village continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the storm that was gathering on the horizon. But I could no longer pretend that everything was as it seemed. I had uncovered enough to know that the mask was not a mere symbol. It was a key to an ancient power, a power that had once been harnessed by forgotten priests, and one that now seemed to be within reach of whoever could control it. I spent my time reflecting on everything I had learned. Ezekiel's motives were clearer now. He hadn't stolen the mask out of greed or spite, as I had initially thought. He had stolen it because he believed in its power, because he believed that it was the key to something greater than what the village could ever offer. He had been a fool, but in his desperation, I could almost understand his actions. But understanding wasn't enough. The mask was still out there. And if Ezekiel was still alive, he would be desperate to get his hands on it again. The question was, where was he now? My first step was to visit the village's elders once again. I needed more answers, and I knew that the chief, despite his reluctance, would have the knowledge I sought. When I arrived at his hut, I found him seated alone, staring into the fire. The warmth of the flames flickered against his worn face, but his expression was distant, lost in thought. "Obinna," he greeted me without looking up. "I had a feeling you would return." I sat down across from him. "Chief, I need to know more. What happened to Ezekiel after he was exiled? Where is he now?" The chief's eyes flickered with something. Regret, perhaps. "He was sent to the wilderness. We thought that exile would be enough to remove him from the equation. But the truth, Obinna, is that we do not know where he went after that." "Do you think he's still alive?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The chief paused, and when he spoke again, his words were heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "I do not know, but I fear that if he is alive, he will come back. And when he does, he will seek the mask. That is the power he craves." "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I demanded, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. "Why hide the truth from me?" The chief's gaze was sharp, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man he had once been, the man who had seen more in his years than I could ever imagine. Because some truths are not meant to be known, Obinna. The power of the mask is too dangerous to be wielded by any one person. It was never meant to be understood. It is better that you live without this knowledge than to carry the burden of it. I didn't reply. What was there left to say? The chief had made it clear he didn't want me to pursue the mask any further. But how could I turn away when I knew how much was at stake? The journey begins. That night, I couldn't sleep. The uncertainty gnawed at me. Ezekiel's fate, the mask's power, the curse that had been placed upon it. None of it made sense. And yet, there was one thing I was certain of. The mask was still out there, and Ezekiel would stop at nothing to find it. I had to act before it was too late. The next morning, I gathered what little I could carry and set off on my own. I knew the wilderness was a vast and treacherous place, but I had to find Ezekiel to make sure he never touched the mask again. I couldn't let him repeat his mistakes. I couldn't let the mask fall into the wrong hands again. As I left the village behind, I felt a mixture of guilt and resolve. I had been a part of this village my entire life. I had watched it grow and change, but in the end, I realized that it had never been enough to keep me tethered. The quest for truth, for answers, had always called to me, and now it was pulling me away from everything I knew. What do you think? Was Ezekiel a villain driven by power, or a man who knew the truth before anyone else dared to listen? Obinna now holds a secret that could change everything. Should he reveal it to the village, or protect them from what they're not ready to face? The elders say ignorance protects, but does it really, or is it just another form of control? Is Obinna the one destined to destroy or unleash the mask's power? And where's Ezekiel now? Will Obinna return from the evil forest alive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the last part of the story. Watch out for part 3.